Hey Meachum Village, it's Aneesa. Let's talk about transitions that can break your marriage. Here's the thing that you need to understand. Your marriage is going to go through some rough patches. The sooner you understand that there are going to be seasons in your marriage that are going to be hard, the easier it's going to become. Let's talk about what some of these transitions are and what you can do during these transitions to keep your marriage intact. Let's dig in. Ecclesiastes 3:1-8 says, "For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under the sun, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." Your marriage is going to go through seasons. Your marriage is going to go through seasons of togetherness and loneliness. Your marriage is going to go through seasons of triumph and testing. You're going to go through seasons of clarity and seasons of confusion. You're going to go through seasons of loss and seasons of gain. Well, Aneesa, you're just being negative. No, I'm not. I am positive that your marriage is going to go through transitions and challenges. I've been married for 20 years, and I can tell you right now that Charles and I have been through a variety of transitions, starting when we were young to now 20 years in the game. And there's been things that we've gone through in our marriage, such as, having children, dealing with aging and dying parents, making decisions about career, financial, strain, and all of these different things that can have an impact on your marriage if you're not careful. And it's the small foxes that spoil the vine. So when we approach our marriage as if, we're never going to go through anything and everything will be fine, you're really doing it with rose-colored glasses on. Now, I'm not saying that you have to always expect the worst, but you want to be prepared and you want to have a perspective that allows you to have the ability to think when your marriage goes through tough transitions. Now, let's see what some of these transitions can be that can really test your marriage. So, number one, having a baby. I don't think we talk about this enough. We want babies and they're so cute and they're so cuddly and my biological clock is ticking and I want a legacy and all these things, and children are great. We have two of them. We have two wonderful children. But let me tell you, you have to be prepared because having a baby can really test your marriage, especially depending on how you're set up in your household. For example, if both of you are working full time, you need to have a plan for how you're going to handle that baby. Are you going to come home and be a stay-at-home mom? Are you going to continue to work? I remember, this is when our first son, who's now 15, I remember when he was little, I remember him crying so much. I think I got up and I grabbed him and I was holding him like this, safely, of course, and I stomped to the living room where my husband had fallen asleep in front of the couch, and I just plopped the baby in his lap. And he woke up kind of startled, and I was like, I need to get some sleep. And when you're sleep deprived, when you're hungry, when your body is out of whack, when you haven't been, intimate within your marriage because you're healing from, labor and delivery and all these other things, it can definitely have an impact that could potentially break your marriage if you're not careful. So even, the joys of having a new baby, you also want to be realistic about the responsibility, about the challenges, about postpartum depression and how that can impact the marriage. And so you want to be able to handle that and have a realistic outlook when you have a child, because that is a transition. You're not going to ebb and flow and move the same way you did pre-children after you have children. Number 2, aging and or dying parents. As we get older, so do our parents. And unfortunately, in our community, we tend to not talk about the plan for our aging parents. We go into crisis mode and triage when something happens to one of our parents. If someone has a heart attack, or if they end up in the hospital, or they get a diagnosis, that's when we, tend to try to figure things out instead of having conversations in advance around what are we going to do if one of our parents cannot care for themselves. And so if you have had a major transition, like one of your parents getting sick or your spouse's parents getting sick, and you've had to take them into your home, or now you're having to, navigate their end of life care, or you're having to manage their care in a long-term facility, or you're, up at the hospital every day while they're receiving care there. Those are things that can really take a toll on your marriage, because guess what? When you're not home, that means whatever role you fulfill at home is now going to be the responsibility of your spouse to keep that train moving. And so if you're having to be a caregiver, that's also time that you're taking away from your spouse and from your children and the daily flow of how you do things within your household. And that can have an impact on your marriage, and it can be devastating because it's swift. Now all of a sudden, where your full attention was here and you were able to do these things where your spouse and your children are concerned, now everything is diverted to your aging parent. And so the most important thing here is to be in agreement. And so you want to make sure that you can get to a place where you and your spouse are in agreement with how you're going to handle the transition of your aging and or dying parents. Number 3, addiction. And of course, when we hear addiction, we think drugs, alcohol, and obviously those are things that we can be addicted to. But an addiction is anything that you abnormally use. You can have an addiction to food. You can have an addiction to TV. If you or your spouse are spending, 3 or 4 hours a day or an evening watching TV while other things in the household need to be taken care of, that's an addiction. Scrolling. Listen, I like to scroll just as much as anybody else. I'm a Pinterest girl. I'm an Instagram girl. I like to, look at memes and reels and all that kind of stuff, but that becomes an addiction. And so you really have to assess anything that you're doing and that you're abnormally using, or anything that begins to impact other areas of your lives is an addiction. I think we don't talk enough about even drinking, gray area drinking, right? Having, mimosas at, 10 a.m. every Saturday. When was the last time you went without it, right? And it's not to cast judgment, but you have to start to examine your relationship with the things that you do in your life, especially if they start to take away from your marriage. Addictions are things that you often can't stop without help, without an intervention. And so that's something to consider as well if you have questions about whether or not you're addicted to something. Have you tried to stop? Do you find yourself not being able to stop, or going back to it over time, or going back to it in high stress situations? And so these are also our if you're doing things that you're repeatedly doing, but you're keeping from your spouse, is probably a good sign that you might be addicted to it as well. Number 4, parenting in general, but especially parenting children with special needs. These are things that can definitely take a toll on your marriage. So, Charles and I have, counseled a lot of couples, and we have often seen where, the husband and wife are not on the same page with things like discipline, things like, boundaries. What do we allow? What do we not allow? Charles and I have had to, and we're continuously getting on the same page with our children, especially as they age, right? When my children were smaller, I was extremely Well, I still have a small child, so we're still kind of in that phase, but extremely protective of the things that they watch, the things that they listen to. And, if you have a spouse that maybe is a little bit more, loose around some of those things, that can cause conflict in your marriage. The way you decide to discipline your children, if one of you believes in, spanking and the other one wants to do gentle parenting, that's going to cause conflict within your marriage. Having a child being diagnosed with a special need can definitely cause conflict within your marriage, especially if you're dealing with your own feelings and emotions, almost like the stages of grief, right? Denial, anger, depression, acceptance, and all these different waves of emotions that can come when your child is diagnosed with something that you just simply did not see happening in your future. And now you potentially have to rearrange how you do life with your child, how you do life with your spouse, depending on the diagnosis. And so these are things that can definitely have an impact on your marriage. Number 5, medical crisis. So this is in terms of something that you weren't expected. God forbid someone gets into a car accident and now, they need, medical care or attention, for the short term, long term, or even permanently. Someone gets diagnosed with cancer or with another, disease that brings uncertainty and uneasiness to your household. Medical crisis often also kind of flow into number 6, financial strain. Medical crises can lead, to job loss in some cases. So, going through a medical crisis, which is, to me falls in the category of something that you can't necessarily control unless, sidebar here, unless you are getting diagnosed with a preventable disease, such as high cholesterol and high blood pressure, which are things that we can control, right, through our diet and exercise. But even then, it's a strange. Now we got to move differently. Now we're, overhauling how we eat. And, you might have been eating out all the time and now we got to cook. And these are things that add stress and pressure to the relationship. Number 6, job loss and financial strain. This is something that can take a marriage completely out. Especially if the job loss is sudden. Unfortunately, many folks don't have, 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up. So if the job is lost or we get terminated or whatever the case may be, we're in dire straits. And if we don't find something soon, and if it's not comparable, our lifestyle can start changing pretty quickly. And not just job loss, but also financial strain. Financial strain can come through decisions that we make. It could come through things that are outside of our control as well. And even if you are prepared, it still, causes a strain. It still, it impacts you emotionally, and things of that nature. And so that can cause distance between you and your spouse. It can provoke you all to argue and fight and cause division within your home. And number 7, this is an interesting one because I don't think we talk about this enough. It's job gains and or financial success. And so when you start getting promoted within your career or you start that business and it takes off, sometimes that can ensue jealousy between spouses. When you have financial success and if you haven't done root work within yourself and now you out here, buying, designer bags and shoes and clothes, and sure, you got the financial success, but your priorities are mixed up. Financial success, job gains can also put you in arenas and in situations that you didn't have privilege to before. A lot of times with new arenas and situations can come greater temptation. When you're in a certain income bracket, you're in rooms with people that find money very attractive and that can, start to make, sexual passes and advancements at you and or your spouse. And now, you might not have been getting any attention before, but now you're walking in there, with that tailored suit or that, those Louis Vuitton shoes and all that other kind of stuff. And you look real good. Not that you didn't look good before, but my point is that financial gains and success can also have an impact on the marriage that we weren't expecting. And so we have to be careful not to just chop it up to loss and strain. And so that's going to be the end of part 1. Come back for part 2 to get more on how we deal with transitions that can break your marriage.